Admiral Zexithara adjusted her crystalline headpiece as she watched the human ambassador settle into the gaming chamber. The ornate room aboard the Dominion flagship Eternal Supremacy had hosted countless diplomatic victories over the millennia, its walls lined with trophies from conquered civilizations. Today, it would witness something unprecedented. Ambassador Chen, Zexithara's voice carried the melodic tones of her species, the Vorthak, whose empire spanned 3 galactic arms. We appreciate your willingness to participate in our traditional diplomatic contest. The grand strategy of empires has been played for over 10,000 standard years. Dr. Sarah Chen nodded politely, her fingers drumming against the table. Thank you for the invitation, Admiral, though I should mention I've never played this particular game before. The Vorthak delegation exchanged amused glances. Fleet Commander Korthul leaned forward, his bioluminescent patches pulsing with condescension. Of course, human. Your species has only discovered faster-than-light travel within the last century. This game requires sophistication. The game board materialized in the center of the table, a 3-dimensional holographic display showing thousands of star systems, trade routes, and military positions. Each player controlled a galactic empire, complete with fleets, resources, and diplomatic relationships. The Vorthak had used this game to evaluate and subsequently dominate dozens of species. The rules are simple, Zexithara explained. Expand your territory, manage resources, conduct diplomacy, and eliminate opponents. Victory comes through military conquest, economic dominance, or diplomatic superiority. Matches typically last several days. Chen studied the display with keen interest. Fascinating. It's like a combination of risk, civilization, and diplomacy, but with real-time elements and... She paused, noting the confused expressions. Never mind. Shall we begin? The game commenced with Chen controlling a modest human faction on the galactic rim. The Vorthak players, Zexithara, Korthul, and Trade Minister Vexnari, commanded vast empires with established territories and resources. By all measures, the humans stood no chance. For the first 20 minutes, Chen appeared to struggle with the interface, asking basic questions about resource allocation and ship movement. The Vorthak players grew increasingly confident, dividing their attention between the game and casual conversation about trade agreements. Your species shows promise, Vexnari remarked while expanding his mining operations. With proper guidance from the Dominion, humans could become valuable junior partners in our empire. How generous, Chen replied absently, her fingers dancing across her control panel. I'm curious about your hyperspace lanes. They seem to follow predictable patterns based on gravitational signatures. Korthul chuckled. Indeed. Our scientists mapped these routes millennia ago. They represent the most efficient paths between systems. Chen nodded thoughtfully, then made several seemingly random moves, establishing small outposts in barren systems that the Vorthak had ignored. Her fleet movements appeared erratic, even counterproductive, as she sent ships along roundabout routes rather than the established hyperspace lanes. 30 minutes in, Zexithara noticed something peculiar. Several of her border worlds had suddenly lost communication with her core systems. Strange. There appears to be interference on the hyperspace frequencies. Oh, that might be my fault, Chen said cheerfully. She gestured to her scattered outposts. I've been experimenting with quantum resonance disruptors. Turns out, if you place them at specific gravitational equilibrium points, they create interference patterns in hyperspace. Your communication networks are remarkably centralized. The Vorthak exchanged worried glances. In the game, as in reality, their empire relied on instantaneous communication across vast distances. Without it, their carefully coordinated fleets and resource networks began to falter. But that was only the beginning. Chen's seemingly random ship movements had positioned her modest fleet at key choke points along the hyperspace lanes. When Korthul attempted to reinforce his border systems, he found his massive battle fleets trapped in hyperspace bottlenecks. How is this possible? He demanded. You're using inferior human technology. Ah, but that's where you're wrong, Chen replied. finally looking up from her display. You see, I'm not just an ambassador. I'm also a game designer. I've spent the last 15 years creating strategic simulation games for Earth's military academies. She manipulated the display, highlighting her seemingly worthless outposts. Your hyperspace network is beautifully efficient, but it has a fatal flaw. It's completely predictable. Every route has been optimized for maximum throughput, which means there are natural choke points. Control those points, and you control the entire network. Vexenari watched in horror as his trade routes collapsed. Without reliable communication or transportation, his economic empire began to crumble. Worlds that had been interconnected for millennia suddenly found themselves isolated. But your fleets are so small, Zexithara protested, watching her own forces being systematically outmaneuvered despite their numerical superiority. Size isn't everything, Chen said. You've built your strategy around overwhelming force and centralized control. But you've never faced an asymmetric approach. My ships aren't trying to match yours in direct combat. They're targeting your infrastructure, your communications, your supply lines. As if to demonstrate, Chen's fleets struck at hyperspace relay stations and resource nodes, causing cascading failures throughout the Vorthak empires. Their massive fleets, suddenly cut off from command and supply, found themselves scattered and ineffective. 45 minutes into the game, Zexthara made a desperate attempt at direct assault on Chen's core worlds, but her forces, traveling along the predictable hyperspace lanes, walked directly into ambushes that the human had prepared with mathematical precision. You knew exactly where we would attack, Korthul said, his bioluminescent patches now dim with defeat. Of course, Chen replied. You're using a 3,000-year-old tactical doctrine, very effective against opponents who play by the same rules, but predictable once you understand the underlying assumptions. By the 50-minute mark, the Vorthak empires were in complete disarray. Their fleets were scattered, their economies collapsed, and their communication networks compromised. Chen's small but strategically positioned forces controlled every major hyperspace junction in the galaxy. At exactly 1 hour, Zexithara's capital world fell to a precision strike that had traveled through a hyperspace route that officially didn't exist, one that Chen had calculated using principles of multidimensional geometry that the Vorthak had never considered. The game board flickered and displayed the victory screen. Human Empire, dominant victory. The Vorthak sat in stunned silence. Their empire, which had taken millennia to build and had never known defeat, had been completely dismantled in 60 minutes by a species they considered primitive. How? Zexthara whispered. Chen leaned back in her chair. You assumed that because you were older and more technologically advanced, you were automatically superior strategists. But strategy isn't about having the biggest ships or the most resources. It's about seeing patterns, adapting to circumstances, and thinking several moves ahead. She gestured to the devastated game board. Your civilization has been playing the same game for 10,000 years. You've perfected your techniques, but you've also become predictable. Humans, on the other hand, have been fighting each other for our entire history. We've learned to expect the unexpected. Korthul's patches flickered with what might have been respect. Your species, what do you call this type of warfare? Chen smiled. We have many names for it. Guerrilla warfare, asymmetric tactics, disruptive strategy, but personally I call it thinking outside the box. As the Vorthak delegation contemplated the implications of what they had just witnessed, Chen quietly updated her assessment of the galactic situation. If this simple game was any indication, the galaxy's established empires were far more vulnerable than they realized. Humanity had just announced its arrival on the galactic stage, not with superior firepower or ancient wisdom, but with something far more dangerous, unpredictable creativity, and the ability to see solutions that others considered impossible. The age of human expansion was about to begin,